Congratulations. You're right. It's not your fault. You're still paying the price. You're still in the middle of the consequences for whatever happened. You may not like it, but you're still there. So there's no blame. And we actually had to explain that to him. It's like, look, dude, we're not blaming you for this. Okay, so it's not your fault. Well, but you were the one in charge in this particular situation. You were the one responsible in this situation. So blame has nothing to do with it. Fault has nothing to do with it. Hello and welcome to Old Man Energy. I'm your host, Flint Anderson. And if this is your first time with us, we appreciate you giving us a shot. And if you are returning, well, man, you guys are awesome. You're in for more insanity or whatever it is that you guys like to call my life these days. If you do not follow me on social media, then we post you unique content there daily. Sometimes podcast clips, but motivational teaching and funny stuff along with some gym stuff. So make sure you're following us on Instagram and TikTok and the Old Man Energy page on Facebook. And as always, if you're not liked and subscribed here, then please go like and subscribe. That's what keeps us going. Capital of the internet appears to be attention. So yeah, the more that you share this message with your friends and consume it yourself, the more it powers us to keep going. So I'm going to jump right into it today. There's something that really has been on my heart lately, and we titled this, or at least I think we're going to title this episode, "It's Not My Fault," but that does not give it true justice. This is going to go out to all of you guys my age that are my followers, and I really hope this strikes home with you younger generation, because this is really who I'm talking to at this point. It's not my fault really translates to, but it's not my fault. It's not my fault. It's not my fault. If I hear that again as a way to deflect accountability or responsibility, I think I'm going to puke. It's just ridiculous. And let me tell you why. If something is not your fault, but it's a circumstance that you're involved in, you still have to be accountable for it. You're still paying the price and the consequences for it. Now, on a superficial level, this happens in, not even superficial, that's the wrong word. This happens in relationships all the time. And I've talked about this in other episodes before. I have an incredible, amazing admiration for women because they pay the price for men's bad decisions all the time. It's not their fault, but they're still accountable for them. And it happens day in and day out all the time. That is not superficial. But what about when it comes to children? Oh, it's not my fault. It's not my fault. Well, one thing that happens whenever you transition from being a child into being an adult, and the sooner you learn this lesson, the easier it is for you, is that there's a lot of shit that happens to you over the years that ain't your fault. Nobody fucking cares. You can whine about it all you want. So what? Oh, my boss let me go today. I got fired. It just wasn't my fault. Your boss doesn't care that it's not your fault, or that you didn't finish that project, or whatever reason that you got fired. Your landlord also doesn't care that you didn't pay the rent, that you didn't have the money for the electric company. Damn sure doesn't care that you can't tell them it's not my fault. They don't care. So it may not have been, you know what, maybe your coworker got you fired in this particular example, and that's not your fault. Who fucking cares? It doesn't matter. The electricity is still going to get shut off if you don't pay the bill. You're still going to be removed from your house if you don't pay your rent or your mortgage, depending on whatever it is. You're still going to be hungry if you don't buy your groceries. If you don't have any money, it doesn't matter whose fault it is at all. So, rant is over, so ostensibly speaking, but what does it mean? It means accountability. I mean, the day that you start accepting accountability for everything in your life is the day that your life as an adult starts. And I don't care if you're 15, if you're 25, or if you're 60. If you haven't accepted accountability for literally every single thing that goes on around you, then you've never truly chosen to live. Disclaimer, all of these are my opinions, so I am not a psychologist, doctor, or an engineer, or whatever would apply in this situation. So take that for what it's worth. Now, back to me. Listen, you don't deserve anything. You are not owed anything. And you have to pay the consequences for everything that happens in your life, whether you like it or not. If you choose not to pay those consequences, well, you know what? Then you won't. But then you'll pay a bigger price down the road. You will pay different consequences later in life. You can't ignore your responsibilities at all. It's not the way this works. When is it time to learn that it's not my fault? And what does that really, really mean deep down? Well, it's not my fault. Well, teenagers and kids are going to say it's not my fault as a defense mechanism. Somewhere around 12 to 15, you really need to start accepting responsibility for what's going on in your life. And you know what? This is something that can be done whenever. You don't have to wait on your parents' permission. And you don't have to wait until you've spun around the sun a certain number of times to start accepting responsibility for things in your life. You can start accepting responsibility for everything in your life as soon as you want to. There's a lot of shit that happens to us. There's a lot of trauma that happens to us as we go through life. Sometimes our parents are crappy. Sometimes our parents aren't there. Sometimes things happen when our parents aren't around. Sometimes things happen just in general that are really not our fault, but it's still our responsibility to deal with because if we don't deal with them, nobody's going to deal with these things for us. As a child growing up, if one thing that I had been taught younger was to accept full accountability and responsibility for everything around me, I think my life would have been significantly different. And don't get me wrong, I don't have a bad life now, but I also decided years ago to accept responsibility for everything around me. Now, am I great at that? No, I'd give myself maybe an 80, maybe an 85. But you'll never hear me say it's not my fault. I don't do that. But do I handle everything 100% correct? No. Is my life exponentially better because I handle 80% of it correctly? Absolutely. As a kid, as a young person, as a young adult, once you start accepting responsibility, it doesn't mean you're taking the blame for anything because at its heart, saying it's not my fault is looking for blame. And there's a quote, and I can't remember who said it, but assigning blame doesn't solve the problem. You know what? Let's say the circumstances are impacting your life right now fall squarely on someone else's shoulders. Congratulations. You're right. It's not your fault. You're still paying the price. You're still in the middle of the consequences for whatever happened. You may not like it, but you're still there. Assigning blame to whatever situation it is, that even psychologically, it doesn't, in my opinion, doesn't really hurt anything. It doesn't help. It doesn't do anything. It just makes us feel better for a few minutes. And then we have to go on with our lives and deal with what we're dealing with anyway. That doesn't make any sense, guys. It just doesn't. So, by accept responsibility does not mean the same thing as take the blame. Um, Ashton and I had this discussion several times, but we had it recently today. It was not my fault. It's not my fault, and it was about something inconsequential, the dog or something. I don't even remember, but him not taking responsibility for it, it ultimately wasn't his fault. It was the dog's fault. But so what? He still had to clean up. That was it. The dog messed somewhere they weren't supposed to, but and he had to clean up. He had to clean up the mess. Well, it wasn't my fault. Well, okay, then make different choices because you're the one that's going to pay the price, whether it's your fault or not. So there's no blame, and actually had to explain that to him. It's like, look, dude, we're not blaming you for this. Okay, so it's not your fault. Well, but you were the one in charge in this particular situation. You were the one responsible in this situation. So blame has nothing to do with it. Fault has nothing to do with it. Responsibility had everything to do with it. He had to clean the mess up. That was it. That was it. It was a 20-minute discussion over nothing other than, yeah, okay, maybe I need to make a different choice next time. So, and that gets back into looking at your day and making sure that you're doing what you need to be doing, or that you're giving yourself ample time to take care of the stuff you need to take care of before you go there. So, when we're talking about taking accountability for everything that goes on around you, let's use this example. And I remembered what it was. And I was taking the dog to the groomers, and she may or may not have used the bathroom right outside the door of the groomer's place, and he had to clean it up. He still wasn't sure whether it was hers or not, but to add insult to injury, he stepped in it, so then it was on his shoe, and he had to clean all that up, which is kind of gross, and it's a gross example. But he got out of bed 5 to 10 minutes before he had to leave to take her to the groomers. Well, it didn't give him enough time to walk around the yard. It didn't give him enough time to handle his responsibilities because the groomer was his responsibilities. Her taking a dump outside the groomer's office was not his fault, but it was still his responsibility. He still had to clean it up. And then him stepping in it, well, that was also his responsibility because he had to clean his shoes up or he's going to track it in the house. He's going to track it in his car. He's going to get it. So none of that was his fault, but it was all his responsibility. So accepting responsibility does not mean accepting blame. Obviously, to blame him would have been him messing outside the groomer's office. That doesn't make any sense. He's not doing that. That's just not, there's no blame involved here, but he did have to clean up that mess that was there, even if it wasn't hers. It doesn't make any sense for him to try and avoid that responsibility. It was his. He wasn't even shirking that, but he was upset because it wasn't his fault. This is a circle. It goes round and round and round and it never ends. Okay, who are we going to blame? We're going to blame somebody. Well, it's not my fault. It's not my fault. Ultimately, he still had to clean up the mess and he still had to do what he needed to do. So when you start accepting responsibility for everything around you, you start breaking these cycles and you start creating linear movement instead of this circular blame game that really gets nothing accomplished. And you still have to do all the work at the end anyway, except now you're tired, frustrated, and pissed because you just spent 30 minutes to an hour trying to figure out whose fault this was, even though you were never going to make them take responsibility for it, even if you figured out whose fault it was or who was to blame for it. So take a look. One easy thing to do in this specific situation, and this is an easy way to take control of the circumstances of your life, 100%. Take a look at what you have to do for the day before, and allow yourself enough time to handle your responsibilities before your first appointment or whatever it is. In his case, if he'd have gotten up 30 minutes earlier, he could have had himself a bowl of cereal for breakfast, gone outside and played with the dog a little bit. If it truly was her that needed to use the bathroom, she would have done it at that time and then could have taken her to the groomers, and none of that would have happened. And he ended up spending that same amount of time trying to blame somebody else. No, he wasn't even trying to blame somebody else. Don't let me take that away from him. He wasn't trying to blame anybody. He was trying to push fault for it off. We're not necessarily onto anybody, just off of himself. Well, the fault was never with him. So the first thing you can do is take a look at all the circumstances of what's going on the next day and make sure you allow yourself enough time to do what you need to do. The second thing is when something bad happens to you or something that somebody else is doing that impacts you or something that you did that impacts you starts messing with you, do not blame anybody. Don't blame yourself. Especially don't blame yourself because that's a double negative spiral to go down and those are hard to break. Don't look for a reason or say, "Oh God, this is not my fault." If you're in a car accident and somebody hits you, that's not your fault. But you need to immediately start controlling as many of the variables as you can, responsibility, or your life is going to get exponentially harder. It's already harder and it's not your fault. But you can't look at your car and go, "I need you back on the road because this wasn't my fault." You know what? The insurance company is probably going to get you back on the road and they're probably going to make sure that you get what you need and you're good to go. Well, you know what? If you don't start taking responsibility right then, gathering the information about the wreck, making sure you got their other person's insurance information, making sure that there's a police report, making sure that all your paperwork is done, taking responsibility, even though this is not your fault. And if you don't know how to do this, young folks, call somebody who's an adult in your life if you're in this bad situation, especially a car wreck situation, and ask them, reassure them that you're okay, and tell them why you're calling them. Say, "Hey, I've never done this before. I need to know what to do." Usually this is going to be mom or dad because we've all been through it at one point or another. But if you don't got mom and dad to call, call any adult. Anybody who's over 40 has been in some kind of car wreck and can help you step you through what you need to do. Remain calm, make sure everybody's okay, make sure that you gather the insurance information, take lots of pictures. There's certain protocols and things that need to be done, and you may not be thinking as clearly as possible. So set this as a trigger. Again, that's accepting responsibility. What if the person that hit you doesn't have any insurance? Well, that's their fault. But then you could say it's not my fault, but it's their fault. Your car's still broken. If they don't have any insurance, there's a really good chance that they don't have anything worth suing them for. That's an assumption, but it's true in most cases. So, still not your fault. None of this so far is your fault, but now it's your responsibility because your car is still broken. Well, now you have to come up with a way to pay for your car to be repaired and to get yourself back on the road or sell your car and get another car. But either way, you have some decisions to make and you have some responsibility and some accountability to accept to make that situation go away. None of that's your fault. All of it's their fault. They are to blame for 100% of it, and they're not going to do a damn thing about it, and nobody's going to make them. That's the harsh reality, guys. That is just the harsh reality. And there's a lot of 40, 50, 60-year-olds living out there that have lived their entire life not blaming others. And there's a lot of people out there that have gone through their entire life with the "it's not my fault" mentality, and then yet they look around and wonder why they are where they are in life. Nothing that impacts you on a daily basis can be discounted by saying it's not your fault, and can be avoided by saying it's not your fault. Nobody's going to step up to the plate and take responsibility because you said it's not my fault. Nobody. I don't care if you're a kid or an adult or whatever. But I will tell you this much: the earlier in life that you start accepting responsibility for all the circumstances around you is the time in your life that you start becoming free, that you are able to start having what you want and controlling your own life, accepting responsibility for your life instead of shifting blame. So I hope this helps, guys. I'm not mad, but I am frustrated at the number of people that like to say it's not my fault. Let's not do that anymore. I hope every single one of you takes this message and runs with it and starts accepting responsibility and accountability for everything going on around them in your life. Your life will get easier. Listen, if somebody that you know can use this message, please share this with them. Put in a good word for me. Love y'all. Peace. Hey, welcome back to Old Man Energy. Listen, this just happened after I finished recording that podcast episode. Not even, I mean, the message came in while I was recording it. A perfect example of not my fault. And you, I, I could not have planned this better. I got a message. I'm sponsoring and mentoring a young man at the Florida Youth Challenge Academy. Good program that's available here in Florida. And there's an extensive background check that's required, a bunch of stuff, excuse me, that you have to do to qualify to be involved in this program. I finished all of my paperwork and my background, all of that stuff back in October. Zipped it all up, sent it over, did everything I was supposed to do. Detailed email. Okay, I did this. These people are providing this. Here's the address I went to take care of this. Just everything that needed to be done as detailed as I possibly could. Sent it over back in October. Program started today for these young men, and I'm waiting on my information. They keep saying, "Okay, everything's good. We'll get it after it starts. You'll be good to go." Just got a message while I was recording the podcast. "Hey, your fingerprint card is missing. You didn't ever mail it in." What? Wait a minute. Went back and double checked my paperwork. No, I emailed the coordinator of the program on the day that I got my fingerprints done. They said I went to their specific spot that they specified. They said they would provide them, that I did not need anything. I didn't have to mail anything because they were taking care of it. I noted that in the email along with everything else. This is not my fault, but it is my responsibility because you know what? I did everything I was supposed to do. But now, if I don't take care of this particular situation, this young man may not have me as a mentor. He may not have one at all. I don't know how they handle that situation. I haven't done this particular program before yet. But you know what? I already did all my stuff. It's not my fault. So what? Who cares? Nobody cares that it's not my fault. Where am I going to blame? Does it really matter who I'm going to blame for this? And that could be the person coordinating. It could be the person that didn't send it. Maybe they got lost. Maybe somebody made a mistake. It doesn't matter. This is my responsibility to deal with. Just thought I'd share that with you guys before I hop off here and go actually physically deal with this, because I'm going to accept accountability for it and I'm going to go on from there. Another thing that we're going to talk about on a different episode is ownership. This ties in hard with ownership, but accepting responsibility and taking accountability. Accepting accountability and taking responsibility. I guess it works both ways. That's not the same thing as ownership. Taking ownership is the next level of accountability and responsibility. We're going to talk about that separately. But I thought I'd share this situation with you guys. Hopefully, I will get this resolved fairly quickly and we'll move on about our business. So, love y'all.